transparency over what happened. With us to give us more insight is Greenwald himself, joining us now from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Glenn, it is great to see you. Recap for my audience what you wrote about over the weekend, about why particularly this CNN issue is so disturbing, given the enormity of the story regarding President Trump and the Russians.
Right. So you described exactly how the story fell apart, and it's certainly the case that anyone in journalism, whether it's people at Fox or people at The Intercept or anywhere, are going to get stories wrong sometimes. This was not just a blockbuster story that fell apart, but what is most disturbing to me is two things. One, it's a long line now of stories about Trump and Russia that major media outlets have trumpeted in a very flamboyant way, only for those stories to completely fall apart upon minimal scrutiny, always going in the same direction of trying to prove that Trump really did collude with the Russians in a criminal way and that Russia is essentially taking over the United States. So it's not just one mistake, it's a huge series of them, always toward the same outcome and the same agenda. But the second and more disturbing thing for me, Laura, is the question of how it is that not just CNN, but ultimately CBS and MSNBC, which said they confirmed the story, got it wrong. They all claimed that multiple sources told them that this email sent to Don Jr. was dated before the WikiLeaks publications became public. How did multiple sources all get the same date wrong when talking to multiple media organizations?
Well, Glenn,
it's impossible to think about how that could be innocent, and Glenn, they refused to say.
They refused to say over the weekend when they trotted out David Frum and Carl Bernstein, who's been dining out on Watergate for 40-plus years. They wouldn't even entertain questions about that. It didn't even go into that at all. But if multiple sources, I think the date was where there was missing one digit. Was it the 4th to the 14th or something like that? So given that case, how could multiple people read a number wrong or transmit it incorrectly? To me, that on its face, just putting my legal cap, seems very far-fetched.
Right, exactly. I mean, it seems like it was a deliberate attempt to mislead, in which case they have the obligation to say which members of Congress, probably Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, were the ones who gave them that false information. But if it wasn't deliberate, they have the obligation to say how it happened. Instead, what they did was they brought a CNN employee, Carl Bernstein, and David Frum, who spent 2 days defending CNN, on to pretend that they were willing to talk about it. They didn't bring me on. When I write about Fox News and all of its many flaws and many mistakes and many humiliations, which have taken place a lot this year and the last year, CNN immediately invites me on, and Fox doesn't. And that's the reverse that happens when I write about CNN. Fox loves to have me on, and CNN won't. And I think that really is the issue. I don't want it to be implied that this is a problem unique to CNN and MSNBC. Fox has had its share of incredibly embarrassing mistakes, also always in the direction of its own political agenda. And the problem is that media outlets now are balkanized. They talk only to their audiences, and they don't have any transparency or accountability duties. And that, I think, is what's ruining journalism.
First of all, if I get something wrong, Glenn, you have an open invitation to come on and correct me. I have no problem. I'm not a perfect person, believe me. If I get something wrong, I'm happy to have you come on and have a conversation with it. So I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about there, but I want more people on my show. We have trouble sometimes getting people who are, Democrats on the show or liberals. So I'm always welcoming more voices. So I'm happy to have you on for that. But it's not just CNN, though. We have New York Times coming out with stories they have to then correct. Obviously, CBS, Washington Post sometimes repeats the false stories that other networks are printing. And sometimes what they say is there's a rush to get news out. It's just because of the speed of the internet. Is that a plausible explanation here?
No, I don't think so, because, and this is what I said in my article, is that if people were just making mistakes journalistically because they were rushing or because human beings are fallible, as we all are, you would expect roughly 50% of the mistakes to go in one direction and 50% of the mistakes to go in the other direction. And what you're seeing in this story is the exact opposite. Virtually 100% of the mistakes that outlets like CNN and the Washington Post and MSNBC make are designed to undermine and subvert Donald Trump and to bolster the Russia-Trump story, just like all of Fox's mistakes are in the opposite direction. I don't mean your show, which is only a couple months old. I mean the two that Donald Trump loves to watch most, which is the morning show full of disinformation and the evening show that precedes yours. And I think that's the problem in journalism, is these mistakes stop looking like mistakes when they always go in the same direction and are always bolstering the same political agenda. And I think you're seeing that around most media outlets and not just the ones that we're discussing.
I have a question on something slightly, well, completely unrelated, not slightly unrelated. Because you really push for transparency in various reporting, especially when they involve criminal wrongdoing or alleged criminal wrongdoing, do you think that in cases like with Al Franken and other people accused of sexual misdeeds, that women or men who make accusations should be able to remain anonymous? Do you think that's fair?
No, I think that's terribly unfair. There was, in fact, just a couple of months ago, a document that was circulating around the internet that purported to identify men in the media who had misbehaved with sexual misconduct, and it was entirely anonymous.
Yeah.
And everyone in the media had read it, people had talked about it, and it's so offensive as a lawyer, if you care about due process, but just as a human being who cares about ethics and basic fairness, to allow people who are accused the opportunity to defend themselves, which they can't do if they're being smeared with anonymous attacks.
I think, Glenn, there is a lot of accusations flying around from years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and all I'm saying is people should have an ability to respond, and it's really hard to prove or disprove things that have happened many years ago. It's very difficult for men or women, and I understand there are a lot of people hurt out there, but at some point, we have to have some due process before we destroy people's careers. But Glenn, I really appreciated your piece, and thank you very much for joining us. And
don't forget to click subscribe. It's almost as satisfying as skip ad.